In May 19th, 2021, developers of Elite Dangerous released a full release, a next era, next biggest ever update. And these are not my own words, these are developers saying it. However, it's been a year since then, so the question is, in retrospective, now that it had time to marinate, shall we say, what has changed, or rather, what has come of it, and what is the result of it? So come with me, and let's take a look. In fact, you can also check out the link down below for Patreon if you want to support the work I do here. First, let's start with a little refresher for those that perhaps were absent in this time. Space legs that Odyssey brought in were the logical next step. There is no disputing that. Developers knew it.
So much to do. I think I'm quite looking forward to being able to walk around space stations.
I would love to see players running around their ship and other ships, dealing with emergencies and repelling borders.
And we, the players, felt it. It was the holy grail in distant Elite Dangerous's future. Years passed. Content and general changes seemed to get smaller and smaller with every update, to a point that after the so-called Beyond series, the game was left in a near standstill, with a vague promise of quote-unquote paid content sometime in the future. That, as it turned out, took about a year and a half and was called Project Watson, aka Odyssey. First announcements for Odyssey got accidentally dropped, like a newborn on a slippery and cold hospital floor. Yet despite it, it was like an adrenaline injection straight into the heart. The hype got real, and you can even see the day on Steam when players logged in to dust off their pilot seats once more in anticipation for this, the biggest update yet. It was looking very, very promising. Soon the time came when the people could actually get their first taste of this revolutionary update in the form of a pre-release alpha. I seriously can't put enough quotation marks around it, so I won't try. And make no mistake, this pre-release was a marketing ploy to get those deluxe $60 game purchases, which after the release became pointless waste of money. As for this quote-unquote alpha, well, it had very poor performance, hitting very low and inconsistent frame rates. Yet, I knew that optimization is the very last step in game development, and in this quote-unquote alpha, it would not be included in full. So I trusted devs to already have it sorted out behind the scenes. However, gameplay and UI design were not going to change. And while people try to be optimistic about the launch, saying that, well, who knows, if we see 90 or 9% of this update in the alpha, it's too early to judge. Well, concerning signs already reared their heads. A few months later, the full release was made, and it confirmed in the very first day the deepest fears of even the fervent defenders of the game. The so-called quote-unquote alpha was 90% of the release version, and the remaining 10% was yet more mindless grind for the engineering that the gameplay revolved around. Gameplay-wise, Odyssey added walking around, which did have very, very cool aspects, but the real gameplay existed, well, in only two forms. Shooting people with the so-called FPS gameplay, and exploration, which devolved into just staring at plants on planets, which was already cut down gameplay after the people found the circle-matching minigame to be counterproductive for explorers. As for the FPS combat gameplay, well, for me as a FPS gameplay fan, for my genre, my favorite type of gameplay, in my eyes, it was an absolute disgrace, which in painful detail I described in my long-ass video, so check it out for more detail. Then there was a new planet generation algorithm and tech introduced. It ended up being more detailed than the previous version, however, it was clearly lacking variety and uniqueness, which players quickly realized, and some would rightfully call it an actual downgrade instead. And while developers unlocked more planets to land on, it was only on quote-unquote light atmosphere planets, meaning that the only difference between atmosphere-less planets was the bluish tint in the sky and the new plants. And that was literally it. No clouds, no liquid puddles, lakes, rivers or oceans, no real winds or storms either. Now, what soured taste even more was the previously hinted and heavily implied ability to simply walking inside your own ship. Hell, even if it is in the cockpit of the larger ships. That was nowhere to be seen, and instead players got...
One of the key things I really wanted to push was the idea that you'd kind of get that Neil Armstrong moment when you actually set foot on a planet for the first time.
Of course, there were additional missing features and options that people have come to expect in a modern game, like character emotes, megaship and fleet carrier interiors. Hell, even sitting down on a fucking chair was missing. And many others like this. But what really painfully made it clear what Odyssey and what Frontier as a company are was the performance of the update. It was nearly the same as the quote-unquote alpha, and people realized almost immediately that optimization and any kind of performance improvements were completely skipped for the full release. And I'm not just talking about some bad performance of just some issues here and there. No, recommended the minimum spec machines that the company officially released specs for would never hit expected performance, and frankly, I'm astonished that there is no class action lawsuit going on about this alone. And then it didn't take me too long to realize what had occurred here. Frontier had released Odyssey on May 19th, not because they didn't know about the performance or lack of content or anything else. No. You see, at the end of the May, Frontier Developments, as a publicly traded company, ends its fiscal year. So clearly there were a lot of problems and issues, to say the least. Now, that's even an understatement of the year. However, it's been a year since then. They've had time to regroup, recuperate, and potentially make things right. So, what has happened to Odyssey and the game itself since then? So let's then start with the first months. As expected, the outrage was rather swift, and while there were some creators and general public that were, shall we say, optimistic, the result was clear to everyone. In the first months, the player numbers on Steam alone dropped, and while it is usual for numbers to drop past the launch of any game or update, well, for Elite, after the second month of release, the player numbers dropped below the lowest monthly average in 2 years. In the third month, the player numbers dropped below the average of the last 4 years. Sure, this was only on Steam. We don't have the numbers for Epic, non-Steam PC version, and of course consoles, but the trend was very clear. While updates came monthly, none of them improved Odyssey to a point it would ever hit the official standards for the said recommended and minimum spec machines. Content-wise though, they did add emotes and later megaship and fleet carrier interiors. However, these really are minor things when the main gameplay once again was nothing but a time-wasting exorbitant grind, this time just on foot. And while they copied ship engineering, they also somehow actually made it worse. And that in typical Frontier design fashion was the best offering for gameplay for Odyssey. In this time, I released my final part of hypercritical review for Elite that focused on Odyssey portion, so please take a look at it. It has way more in-depth and haunting information that is worth learning. But safe to say, Odyssey literally undid years of not only what the team had made, but also community's efforts. Distant Stars, a bi-yearly kind of a mega expedition organized by players, announced an indefinite cancellation. Many community members, creators, streamers, personalities looked elsewhere like Star Citizen, X4, No Man's Sky, or completely quit. All that in just first few months of the release of this optional DLC. As of today, player numbers on Steam have plateaued to near all-time low. And I wish I was joking! So, did anything of note even happen in this time in the year since the launch? Well, we already knew this, but VR had been dropped ages ago, just that now it was officially announced. However, more importantly, after the launch and mostly negative reception, which by the way is still rating on the Steam for the DLC, developers eventually in the first month promised to yet again, quote-unquote, communicate more with the community. Now, I don't know, why does that sound so familiar and played out? Still, as promised, for the first 8 or 9 months, they did release end-of-month summaries, which mostly talked about what they plan on doing and working on next, rather than what they had accomplished for the month in a review sort of a post, but, you know, whatever. Internally, me and other creators were joking and betting almost how soon the developer team would drop this promise. As it happened, as soon as the year rolled around, everyone went on January vacations, no real updates, or the posts were to appear for a while. In fact, it was at this time when they once more resorted to the age-old tactic of closing off and ignoring the community to a point that not even streams were being done. And I remind you, as far as we know, we have, for Elite Dangerous, 4 community managers on staff, at the very least. What the Oh god, that's a joke and a half. Additionally, after the bad launch, it was clear to anyone that Odyssey would not run on consoles the way it is. Still, Frontier is a greedy company, and I fully expected them to put in the bare minimum effort to make Odyssey sellable, if not playable, on consoles, for the last cash-in before they can wash their hands of this franchise. After the launch, they postponed the console launch for 6 months. Then they postponed it indefinitely till PC version can be sorted. I mean, developed like it should have had in the first place before release. And then one funny morning we woke to find forum posts telling that, sorry, console version is officially cancelled indefinitely. For me, it felt like I already had set my expectations so low they could only be archaeologically excavated. But fuck me. See, them admitting console cancellation was more than just that. It also told us that first, they can't optimize or code it to a level that would run on consoles, yes. Second, because they hope to use backwards compatibility as a crutch, it would not run on old generation machines. Third, that also means that minimum spec and recommended spec machines will not get appropriate performance to their advertised standards as well. And fourth, that also means that performance most likely will not get any more real improvements. Oh, and number 5, as they announced additionally in the forum post about consoles, they'll only focus on PC Odyssey version, meaning that even PC Horizons version, like the consoles, will only get the bare minimum upkeep at all. Since I expected them to drop Elite after the console launch, it seems that despite being a year after the big DLC, this just might be it for the game's active development. Sure, they'll probably drop whatever content was planned and made for later Odyssey release sooner or later, but this might just be it. Speaking of said content, what additional content did they release for Odyssey? Or should we start asking, did they even release any extra content at all? Well, funny that. Besides the features that literally should have been at the launch, like the fucking emotes, Jesus fucking Christ, and mega ship interiors, content-wise, well, we got a fucking SRE. Yes, finally, after the broken promise in Horizons to deliver more than just one SRV, now we've got a Scorpion, an SRV that I myself leaked information about at least 6 months prior. Though, in a typical asshole kind of a way, this new SRV is Odyssey exclusive. And that's it. I'm not kidding, that's it. That's all we've gotten as an actual new content for the biggest update in its first year of release. So that leads us to performance then. In the last year it has improved. Yes. However, as I examined all the updates in detail, posted benchmarks and what performance changes they made, it was 9 months later, with the update 10, that the game finally received an actual basic level of optimization. No, not a fix, cause how can you fix something that hasn't been made in the first place? Remember that. Even with occlusion culling finally present in some form or another, when it comes to actual experience of the game, the performance even now, today, is below their own minimum and recommended spec machine expected standards. In a conflict zone where you go and play repetitive, very boring and very unfair shooty bang bang stuff, in that gameplay where you need the most fluent and numerous frames a second, what you get instead is subpar experience, even today. It's baffling to me how even after a year, the state of the game barely has improved in a grand scheme of things. Yes, there are minor changes noticeable, but they still have not reached the bare minimum on technical level alone, which all the more is disheartening. Speaking of dropped balls, remember that planet tech and issues people had with the planet surfaces and height maps looking homogeneous and boring compared to Horizons? Well, guess what? They won't fix or improve that sighting. Not worth the time or effort. You know, I sometimes wonder. I wonder how many developers are actually assigned to Odyssey and General Elite development right now. Now, we do know that before the release there were 100 total developers on the project, and sure, some of them were on and off like the audio team or artists. And it's also safe to assume that after a launch, majority leaves for other projects. So I wonder how many are left, if any, in-house. While Odyssey barely has changed how it works, acts, or flops like a fish out of the water, there has been some statements released about Elite's future, a kind of roadmap, if you will. Back in the day, I did go over some financial reports from Frontier, and I seem to recall some information telling that the new game releases they plan to support for 4 years, while DLCs, like Odyssey, are supported for 2. Well, be it an old information or valid policy today, the first year is not looking good, as the developers semi-finished the game, as it should have been on the launch, and for the next one, honestly, might just dump whatever story content they had made, and I feel we could see the real maintenance phase of the whole game kick in then. Still, about that roadmap, well, this is it. This is how much info and how abundant the year of 2022 is looking. Bare and boned. At this point, it'd probably be funnier to hear them say, "Oh, well, we were working on it." Because this frankly looks sad and pathetic. Now, while I would like to hope and dream like some others, well, I'm Latvian and such concepts are foreign as realistic economies in Russia, but fuck me. As for what will follow in 2023, well, besides a singular feature change, which I fucking bet won't be the grind of engineering, but who the fuck knows, 2023 still will mark the end of this support period, and whether Elite will get any more content past that is up in the air. However, seeing the decrease in player numbers and drastic way of it, the lack of sales and overall negative sentiment, then on top having a really old game as is, which Elite this year celebrates 8 years, makes for an unappealing investment for future development. Especially for a proven, greedy, careless, and frankly maliciously customer-unfriendly company. Well, despite the fact that this game put the fucking company on the map properly. That's how its legacy is treated. My best guess is that they'll relegate the game for maintenance phase and leave it there till the day the servers become too expensive to run compared to sales, and only at that point you can really say that Elite is properly dead. Yet, if we talk about the actual death in interest and more, in retrospect, sadly, the biggest ever New Era update killed Elite. It killed hopes for the game on all but the most blind and faithful fans, and it certainly killed a lot of enjoyment for many others who left and never came back. The base game still is somewhat solid and enjoyable if you avoid the grind, which is basically 90% of the gameplay, but despite that, the foul taste of Odyssey and the dead-end feel can't be washed away. And while sure, there's always a No Man's Sky kind of a chance of recovery, though that also is done with determination that to this day I have never seen from the company or the dev team as a whole. As always, I'd like to be wrong, but fuck, this Latvian's always fucking right, so I guess hope against hope. But still, that's Elite Dangerous Odyssey, a DLC that could have truly launched the game into a stratosphere, and I mean it! Well, for space games at least. But what it managed to do was worse than just being a bad DLC or an update. It managed to ruin the game, or at least nearly ruin it, and I only say nearly because, well, there are still people playing it. But for how long they can continue doing so with the grind loops and boring, monotonous gameplay? Well, I wonder. But as for me, well, I'll continue observing the damn thing and see what's going on. And of course, as developers themselves claim, cause upset. So if you were not upset by me using a couple of words of fuck, well, then I guess I fucking failed, you know? But otherwise, well, if you want to support my work, these kinds of examinations, or just an occasional silly video, well, of course, there's the Patreon through which you can support my work. And in fact, to incentivize a little bit of support from you guys, well, today I'll read the bigger supporter names, but for the next time, I promise to read every single one of you that is YouTube members or Patreon. And, well, there's your incentive to become one of the supporter list, bunch, if you will. The generous bunch, indeed. Oh God, please don't make a long or stupidly pronounceable name. Please don't. Okay, so, Archon, Taco Man, Chris Quinn, Kevin, Chillustrations, Daniel Porter, Richard Hodgson, hopefully I got that right, Valor, Star-Lord, J-Rod, Stephen Coates, and Madwax. Well, those are the biggest and most generous supporters, so massive thanks to you, of course, because of your sort of a contribution. It is possible to do a bit more and, you know, pick up better mics and so on and so forth. So it's all done to improve the, well, this, and maybe next video will be a bit different. So see you then. So the big question is, I forgot the script. Memorizing lines.